We will be recording the session and posting it on our resource hub on our website. Okay, so welcome everyone. Welcome to our early June PSO sharing. We're doing a couple this month, so welcome to our PSO sharing. Today, we're talking about RFPs and how we can use those in sport. So we've asked David Chu, Director of Corporate Services from CSIO, to join us and talk a little bit about what it is that we're talking about. And Liz Ankilla from Cross Country Ski Ontario, it has been working with an RFP recently and has done a couple of them, and she's going to share some of her experiences and value. So David, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you just let me know when you would like your screen changed, okay?
Perfect. Thanks, Wendy. Go ahead. All right, so I thought I'd start off with a quick overview, not knowing the experience of people on the webinar in terms of how much you've used RFPs, if you know what an RFP is, or, given we don't know that experience level, I thought I'd just start at the beginning really quickly and talk about what is procurement. So procurement, it's useful to separate the two concepts of purchasing and procurement. So most of you think about when, for example, even in your personal lives, if you go to a Best Buy and you go and buy something, that's purchasing. It's where it's a subset of the broader procurement functions. It's a set of functions really associated with acquiring goods or services. So like I said, in your personal life, you go out and you go buy a TV, you think about, how much am I going to pay for it? What do I want? And then you go out and you actually pay in cash or credit card or debit or whatever. And that's purchasing. So in the business context, you can think of it as, if you have a purchasing officer or if you have someone in finance who handles, the accounting, it's asking that person to, fill out a purchase order, generate an invoice, actually purchase the thing, arrange for delivery, and then actually get the product. So that is purchasing. Procurement is kind of one level up. It's kind of the more strategic process. It's really the process of, identifying, I've written, shortlisting, selecting, acquiring the right goods and services from a third party through some sort of competitive bidding or tender process. And that's where the RFP comes into play. It's where you actually have a formal process for acquiring these goods or services and actually making sure that they are the right one and not just it's not just an operational process, but actually a strategic identification of the right vendor or the right product that suits your needs of your particular organization at that particular time. And of course, ensuring timely delivery of the right quantity and quality of the product. Next slide. So here are some guiding principles for best practice in procurement. These basically govern how you would want to run an RFP, for example. You want to run them under the principles of openness. So you want to make sure that you're very open about what exactly you want to purchase and what exactly are your outcomes or deliverables that you really want to accomplish. You want to be fair. So you want to have it as available and open as possible to as many vendors as you deem fit. If you have it as a completely open tender, it could be, dozens of people that want to bid on your business. Or if you want to be fair and just say, I just want, these 5 qualified vendors that I know of to bid on it. That's another way, as long as you're giving everyone an equal opportunity to bid on the product or service. That's really a good guiding principle to ensure that you're, following best practice. You want to be transparent. So again, in terms of the process, you want to be as open and transparent as possible about what the process is. You want to be clear about, the bidding timeline, the scoring, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. The fact that it's being, posted broadly and that other people are welcome to bid on it, and it's not going to be single source. So you want to be as transparent as possible about not only the process, but what exactly that the winning proponent is expected to actually do once they actually win the contract. And then finally, the part that's often most important, which is the money side, but also just taking into consideration not just the cheapest, but what I would call value for money. Are you actually getting what you paid for? And not because you paid the least for it, but maybe you paid someone who is extremely qualified, but maybe charged a little bit more, but is in the end going to deliver you more value and a better product or service at the end of the day. Next slide. Here I've outlined a couple of types of procurement, really the one that most people are familiar with, because that's the one that you tend to hear about when people talk about procurement, is the request for proposal. That's the one on the right-hand side. There's also things called request for tender or request for quotation. Those are really where situations where you're really only concerned about the price. You kind of know either what you want is a very standardized product. So for example, if I were to go out and say, I would like to tender for a standard size mug, right? Like this. I mean, these are kind of mugs that are commodities. Anyone can just go out and buy one. I just want the cheapest price. I don't really need a special mug. I just want to know I'm getting the cheapest possible mug out there. In that case, you could simplify your procurement to say, really, you're just asking for a cheap price. So it's really a request for tender or a request for quotation. And the process would be fairly similar, except for the fact that you could spend a lot less time worrying about describing your product or service that you're looking for, and focusing really on making sure that the people that are bidding are really just giving you the cheapest price possible. The second one, which is the more common type, where the product or service that you're asking a vendor to provide is perhaps not standardized, so maybe a custom consulting assignment or a particular piece of equipment that's very specialized, and you're not exactly sure how much it should cost, and so you want to put it out to tender to make sure you're getting the best product and price. And then you would be going for a request for proposal. So, that's really a document used to help outline that evaluation criteria, which is that green arrow I've kind of put there. That's that really outlines what the goods or services that are selected. It'll be basically evaluated on multiple factors. So not just about price, not just about the experience of the people delivering the service or the product. It could be a myriad of factors, and in fact, it's going to be some combination of factors that will determine which one is the best for you. And in a lot of ways, I haven't put this in the slide, but I like to compare procurement a lot to kind of HR. When you're hiring someone for a position, you're not just looking for someone who you can pay the lowest salary to, right? You're looking for someone who fits the job description. So you've spent some time building out a job description. You've decided on, their role, how much experience you think they should have before they can fulfill those job responsibilities. And then also kind of, you're probably thinking of your budget too. You don't want to find someone that's too overqualified, who you'll have to pay, too much money to, because you've got a budget for how much that position should be paid. So it's about balancing that, and then also getting the right fit, someone who actually you can work with and who you feel comfortable working with on a day-to-day basis. So that's kind of the HR, how do you hire a person? I mean, procurement in a lot of ways is the same thing. It's how do you hire a partner, in this case, a company, to actually deliver a good or a service to you. And going through that same selection criteria or evaluation criteria is really important, because you do want to find someone who's not only the best fit, who can do the job, but also is good value for money. Next slide, please. So I've kind of talked about the principles and generally what an RFP is. Next thing is really to think about, how do you design your RFP? So I've talked about it a little bit in the context of, defining your objectives and requirements. Be really specific about what you want. So don't just say, I'd like a consultant. It's like, what exactly do you want the consultant to do? What are the specific deliverables you're looking to get? What are the specific outcomes you're looking to get? Maybe it's, I want them to evaluate my accounting processes, and at the end of the day, I want to have a brand new accounting SOP manual, something like that. So you're being very specific about what you actually want and what you want to accomplish, and that will help the people who are actually bidding on the RFP to determine, A, are they a good fit? B, are they capable of doing the job? Because some consulting firms may be very specialized, and they say, you know what, we don't do accounting, we can only do marketing, or we can only evaluate sports related sports science topics or something. So you want to be very specific in defining those objectives, so that upfront you're being transparent about what you want, and they can be they can be as responsive as possible, or decide, you know what, this RFP isn't for me, I'm not going to bid on it, and you won't end up having to waste your time working with a vendor who really can't deliver on what you actually wanted. The second piece is really defining that evaluation criteria. How are you going to determine that this organization or person who's bidding on your business actually meets what you need? So developing the criteria, like I said, it could be the cost, it could be their experience levels, it could be references that you're getting from other customers who've done work with them. All these things kind of go into, or maybe providing a sample of past work. So all of these things go into helping evaluate, is this the right person or company to help actually deliver on what I'm actually looking for when I defined my objectives. Third, you want to define, again, super important, your budget criteria. Oftentimes this is thought of as the most important, and in a lot of ways it is. But also, I talked about earlier about value for money. It's not always just the one that's cheapest. It's the one that is perhaps the most economical for your budget, but also is capable of doing the job that you want. Because the worst thing that can happen is you select a vendor who is the cheapest and who maybe could have done the job, but maybe if you spent an extra $5,000 or $2,000 or even $100, you would have gotten someone who would have done the job a lot better and fit those objectives and requirements in a better way, and then you would have gotten a better product, spending a little more money upfront. And so it's really more about value, again, value for money, making sure you're maximizing what you're getting for the money that you're paying. And then finally, the most obvious one, figure out what your key dates and timelines are. If you have a consulting assignment and you need to present it to your board or your members on a specific date, work backwards, figure out how much time you need for the consultant likely to do the job. And that's part of the RFP as well, is actually asking them to lay out a timeline that fits your timeline in terms of when you would like the work to actually be completed, and to ask them to say, this is how I anticipate completing it. And that'll be helpful in evaluating whether this is the right organization or person to actually do the job, by having those key dates and timelines in place in your own head in the RFP, and also having the respondents also actually put that down and tell you what their plan is. Because ultimately, when you're evaluating that RFP, you're evaluating those proposals, you're probably in a really good position to say that sounds realistic or that is never going to work. Because ultimately, whatever that good or service that they're providing is, you're likely to have to interact with them as well. So you're going to have a great idea whether their timelines, their proposed schedule is going to work and actually, again, deliver on your outcomes and objectives. Next slide. So finally, you want to implement it. So you've built out your RFP document. You've already figured out your objectives, your evaluation matrix, all that wonderful stuff. Now, actually, how are you actually going to get bids on it? So what I've put here is a couple of examples of how you want to get it out there to as many people as possible. So you want to post it to targeted sites. And on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about some examples of that. So the posting is super important. Thinking about, who do I want to target? Again, I use the analogy of the HR hiring process when you're hiring a staff person. You don't just post to Monster or to LinkedIn. You think about, if I'm hiring someone who is in marketing and I want a marketing or communications person, I could also post it to the IABC, the International Association of Business Communicators, because that is a very specific role that has an association that's attached to it. If I post it there, I'm likely to get some very highly qualified candidates. And it's the same thing with RFPs. If you know of a specific website where the product or service that you're actually trying to procure has an association, perhaps they have a bidding website that they use, or there's a common website. So one of the ones I'm going to talk about in the next slide is one where municipal bidders often all kind of group up. And so that's a good place to put it, because there's going to be lots of people who are looking to bid on RFPs that are out there. So making sure you target those sites and getting it as broad as possible so you can get the maximum number of proposals back on your product or service. You'll want to create an evaluation committee and a scoring matrix, which means you have a group of people who are responsible for actually scoring the proposals when they come in. And again, that scoring matrix can be simple, just a score out of 10, score out of 100, score out of 5, however you want to structure it so that you can actually determine who is the best proposal out there in terms of the ones that you get. So you want to compile the results, you evaluate them, using the evaluation committee that you've put together. And then if necessary, you can interview short lists of proponents. That's not always necessary. Sometimes there's a clear, far and away winner, someone who you think will be the best for the job. And sometimes it's a toss-up. Again, to use the HR example, oftentimes you have two interviewee candidates who you really love, and really it just comes down to which one is really the better fit. And so maybe an interview process might be necessary to really narrow it down to say, you know what, I really want to work with this group. On paper, both of them put forward great proposals, but maybe I want that last interview just to see who comes out on top. And then finally, you select the winning proposal and you finalize a contract using that RFP document that they submitted, the proposal, and then your own RFP documentation to create a formal contract to say, you promised or you said you could do this. Now it's in the contract to say, these are the deliverables, this is the timeline, and this is how much we're going to pay you to do that. And here are the kind of formal contract terms. And that's really the last step that you want to do. Next slide. So again, I talked quickly about that. So you want to maximize the exposure and the reach of your posting. So how do you ensure that? So I've given a couple of examples there, but really it's very specific to exactly what you're actually asking for in terms of a product or service. Merx is a really good one. Merx is a municipal exchange where mostly municipal services and governments use it, but a lot of nonprofits, a lot of nonprofits actually use Merx because, again, there's a fairly wide breadth of companies and consultants out there who will regularly be using Merx to see what bidding projects come up. And so you can see it in my cut and paste. There's equipment there. Looks like there's a toolkit there. It's across Canada, so you can get bidders from everywhere. So that's actually a really good one. Merx is actually free to actually post. It costs money for companies to actually bid on your proposal, but it does not cost anything for you to post it there. So it's actually a really good resource for people to use if you want to get as maximum and as wide exposure as possible. You can post it on Circ. Obviously, that's a very sports centric one. So if you're looking for very specific consulting assignments that are sports related, that might be a great place to post it as well. And then, of course, your own website, social media, LinkedIn, all good places to spread the word because all you really need to do is be able to host or to be able to put the actual RFP someplace and then kind of disseminating it to as many people as possible, both within your own industry and sector, the sports sector, but also broadly across to, Merx will reach, consulting groups that maybe aren't specifically experienced in sport, but they may have experience in that specific thing that you're looking for. So for example, I talked earlier about maybe you want someone to come in and rebuild your standard operating procedures for accounting. You don't have to find a sports-centric consulting group to do that. Someone like Deloitte could do that, or Accenture, or any one of dozens of accounting firms that have consulting arms set up to actually do that kind of work could actually bid on your project, and they may in fact be the best people to look for. So posting and I guess spreading the message as far and as wide as possible will get you the maximum number of proposals. It'll mean a little bit more work for you because you'll have a lot more proposals you'll have to evaluate. But oftentimes, once you've done this enough, you can pretty quickly, sort out the good stuff from the bad stuff and decide, which ones you really want to narrow down and evaluate more in depth and which proposals are really probably not really worth your time. So that's one way to really ensure a good response. And the last one I talked about was targeted or invitational emails. That's where you have a very specific idea in your head about who might be able to do the job, and you've got maybe a short list of 5 or 6 people or organizations that you think could do it, you just maybe send out a targeted or invitational RFP and get it to them rather than posting it widely for the whole world to see. So lots of different ways to manage it. It's really just about seeing what works for you and looking at the particular product or service that you're trying to get and deciding, how specialized is it? Do I want a lot of responses because I'm not really sure how much it's going to cost or how difficult it is to get it done? Or if you already have a really good idea, you can just narrow the scope a little bit down and just invite groups that you already know or people that you already know can do the job and see which one comes back as the best proposal. I think that is it for me. Oh, last one. Right. So this is a document. It's actually very long. I think it's like 50 or 60 pages, but it's a great reference guide. It's called the Procurement Guidelines for Publicly Funded Organizations in Ontario. It is something that the Ontario government issued quite a few years ago. The broader public sector, which is defined generally as, organizations that are funded by government one way or another, by a certain percentage, I believe it's 40% or more. Those organizations are bound by what's called the Public Sector Procurement Directive. You guys are not. It's not. So this is not actually a directive where you would have to follow it, but it does have a lot of great guidelines in terms of how you would want to procure, and also some, I believe there's sample templates in there as well in terms of, RFP. Like if you're going to write an RFP, these are the kind of things you want to include in it. So it's a good reference document. I've included the link there, and certainly make use of that as much as possible because I think it is a good, like I said, framework for it. You don't have to follow it because, like I said, it's not something that is required, but it is a good reference point. So again, just include the link for your reference. That's it for me for now. Wendy, I'm not sure if we're saving questions till the end, but if so, that probably makes it easiest. If not, I will pass it on to Liz, who will take you through her experience.
Thank you, David.
Hi, everyone. So thank you for inviting me to do this. I don't really feel like I'm an expert, but I can certainly share our experiences with everyone. We did have an RFP process about 5 or 6 years ago. We did an HR review. So that was my first experience at the RFP end of things. And it is a bit of a nebulous way of trying to structure something. And I wish I'd had that reference that David just provided when we started there. Anyway, next slide, please. So just a bit of background, Cross Country Ski Ontario is the provincial sport organization for cross-country skiing and Paranordic. Our program, our Paranordic program, is largely volunteer driven, and we've had some great success in that area, but it has been driven by a super volunteer who basically dove in back in 2007 into the para environment and built a program. And she's looking to retire, so we are in a position where we need to do something so that we are able to continue the success in that area, and also develop a program that is provincial in nature as opposed to kind of just built around one person. We came to the conclusion that our program isn't sustainable as in its current form. So thus we decided to reach out and ask for help and seek to procure a consultant to help ensure our future success and the sustainability of the program from the grassroots level up to the performance level. So that's a bit of a background. Next slide, please. So our first steps were to attempt to frame what we wanted to do in coherent language. It was difficult to articulate what we wanted to achieve, and also to kind of pull that together into something that was postable and able to put on websites and advertise what we were doing. So kind of the first thing I did, I went to Google, did some reviewing of RFPs online, and they really were not specific to what we were looking for. They were a lot more business driven as opposed to sport. So then I looked to some of our other sport partners. I went to our NSO, Nordic Canada. I talked to our sport consultant at both CSIO and the ministry and asked if they had anything, and everybody kind of came up empty. So I went back to the drawing board within our own organization, and I pulled out our RFP from our HR review done in 2016 and repurposed that. We purposely, just speaking to some of the things that David talked about, when we did write our RFP for our HR, we purposely did not include a budget because we really had no idea what it was going to take to do what we wanted, and we didn't want to limit the proposals based on a number. So we also did that when we wrote our RFP for our para program development review. We, as David suggested, we had an ad hoc committee that was formed to review the RFP itself, and then also once the proposals were submitted. Next slide, please. So again, same kind of information that David provided. We advertised it on our website, which is a pretty passive way of advertising. We posted it on the SIRC, and we did some word of mouth, but we also kind of didn't do any kind of brainstorming as to who within our community might be, even outside of our ski community, who might be interested in or might have the skills that we were looking for or the experience that we were looking for to produce what we wanted. We also took some recommendations from our sport partners, and we really wanted to explore ways to reach a greater audience. And part of that was that we didn't want to limit ourselves to para-Nordic skiing or our Nordic community. We wanted to get it out into the broader sport community. And I think that's what the SARC website really provided, that resource for us. Next slide, please. So just to let you know, this is where we ended up. We had 5 proposals submitted. All were good proposals. We kind of, in hindsight, and again, speaking to David's talk, we did not include the scoring tool in our original RFP. And we ended up developing a work plan or a scoring tool kind of again based on our HR review, and turned it around to answer, to provide a framework for the answers that the proposals provided. Every person on the ad hoc committee did an independent review of the RFP or the proposals that were submitted, and then we collated it into one spreadsheet for a total score. We used rankings of the proposals rather than scoring, which ended up did cause some confusion. And so it wasn't quite as seamless or as easy to pick our top proposal, at least from my end, because I was collating all of the answers. Anyway, that became important, that we realized that was the scoring tool became a more important part of our RFP process than we initially intended. Next slide, please. So just our conclusions and our learning experiences. And I'll, now that I've kind of gone through our initial RFP, so what we ended up doing is we had 5 proposals. One was clearly head and shoulders above the rest. And we ended up reaching out to that person. And by the time we got to that place that we were able to go into negotiations with her, she had moved on. So we weren't able to procure her as a consultant. So we kind of went back to the drawing board again, reached out to another consultant and asked him to expand his RFP, because we felt that he brought the right experience and the right expertise to the project. And the proposal that he brought back again was still missing the mark. So what we ended up doing was we went back to the drawing board and kind of went with our gut and said, you know what, our RFP had a flaw in it, or several flaws. We did not articulate exactly what we were looking for. And because of that, we weren't getting the correct proposal for what we had in our brains, what we wanted. So it became very important that you have to clearly identify your vision, your key deliverables, and the scope of work. In the RFP writing process, ask for feedback all along the way from sport experts, your partners in sport, because they really do bring a different lens. Even though you think you're articulating what you that makes perfect sense to you, it may not make perfect sense to someone else. With respect to our budget, I think I mentioned earlier that we did not include a budget because we didn't want to predetermine what we were getting. But in hindsight, we probably should have. In particular, what we've done is we've gone out and we've got an RFP back out there right now in Take Two format. It's identified key deliverables. We advertise the scoring tool. And that speaks to David's guiding principles in RFPs, is that it defines that evaluation criteria so that what people are giving you, they understand what they're supposed to give you and how it's going to be scored. So defining that ended up ensuring a bit more clarity in what we were looking for. And the other thing that we realized is language is super important when you're writing these proposals, is that if you aren't using the right language, that you're not articulating the needs that you have, and it ends up lacking. So our big learning experience from this was don't be afraid to hit the reset button, which is what we did. If anyone's interested, it's on the SIRC website right now. Deadline is Friday. So we sent that back out to all of the consultants that initially submitted their proposal. And we also, through that first process, we identified a few other people that may be interested, and we also sent that to them. So it has been a huge learning experience, and every time we do this, it's good to understand that changing what you're doing or hitting the reset button is, if you're not getting what you initially want, it's an important thing to not settle. So yeah, and that's it from me. Any questions?
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, David. So great information there and some tips and hints. I was writing some notes feverishly here. So let's open it up to questions. If you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand. Go ahead and put it into the chat box, or if you want to just unmute and ask it, that's totally fine as well.
Hi, Liz. It's Murray here. Just a question, if you can speak to the composition of the review panel you put together, and any maybe insights you have in terms of the breadth of the people to consider for other sports moving forward, or just some of the dynamics of the personality types and maybe how that prolonged your decision-making abilities?
Sure. So Murray is one of our review or ad hoc committee who's helping us through this process. And if some of you don't know, Murray does bring some para-sport background, which is he's also our sport consultant at the CSIO, so that has been very helpful. We also have our technical director, Victor Wiltman. He is a part of the review panel, and we have 2 members of our Paranordic committee, who one is he works outside for the municipality and brings kind of a young background with some or a young person with some background in high performance skiing. So that was good. And then we also have one of our Paranordic committee chair members from our national capital region. And it was a real wide range of people. It was people who were involved, at a staff level, at our sport partner level, and then also in the community. Have some challenges with getting together due to different timelines. The 3 staff basically work days, and then the other people are working evenings, which usually work days in their own job, and so they're not necessarily available. So that also created some challenges for us. One of the things that we did this time is we're setting up our review dates ahead of the actual closing of it, so that we can pull the switch to move into review mode quite quickly, as opposed to waiting until we receive all the RFPs and then get everybody together.
Great, thanks, Liz.
Wendy, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. Tim McGarry has a question from Ontario Wrestling around any other potential sources for templates besides the ones you've noted, or where to look.
Yeah, I can jump in on that. I mean, honestly, like, we have a template that I'd be happy to share. I'm not sure it's the best necessarily for everyone, only because it's very specific to the kind of things that we're usually RFPing for, which is not necessarily things that everyone else is. But in terms of just the structure, in terms of how to order it, happy to share that and kind of clean it up and share that as a template with everyone that's on the call here. But also, I mean, this is going to sound kind of pedantic, but Google is your friend. Especially if you Google an RFP for kind of broadly what you're looking for, it's almost guaranteed some municipal government somewhere, some organization somewhere has posted their RFP online, and you can just kind of crib from that. I mean, I'm guilty of doing that many times over a very long career of working in operations. Someone's probably already done it. No need to reinvent it, and just kind of pick and choose from especially government ones, which are very, very detailed. You can take that, pare it down to kind of a smaller, more manageable piece, and then, like Liz says, make sure you identify your vision, key deliverables, the scope of work that are specific to what you want. But really, that template you can take from beg, borrow, and steal from a lot of other organizations that have already done it.
Yeah. And it's so nice to be able to get some phrases and ideas on how to articulate some of those things that Liz was talking about as well. Awesome. So Blake asked if your presentation slides will be available to share. Yes, absolutely. We will be posting the recording of this session as well as the slides. And if David could share that template, I'll put that up as a resource as well for you to access, recognizing that this is just totally a sample and for you to take what's relevant for you. Kelvin from Ontario Volleyball is asking if there's a general timeline for RFPs, posting, review, etc. Like, is it a month, 6 months, couple of weeks? What kind of timelines do you usually put out?
I guess for me, is really dependent on what you're asking for. If it's a fairly simple request, oftentimes people can get back to you within, a couple weeks. So I usually put RFPs out there for anywhere to 3 to 4 weeks, especially if there's no urgency. If there is some urgency, obviously you have to shorten the timeline a little bit. But if you can get it out there for longer, I mean, oftentimes with big consulting firms, honestly, they spend a lot of time responding to proposals. They have whole teams that only do proposals. So, they can get proposals turned around pretty quick. But if you're talking about smaller organizations, smaller consulting firms, 1 or 2 person consulting firms, some of the ones that may provide the expertise that you need, they may need a little bit more time because they may be already working on something or on vacation, like who knows. So I'd like to keep RFPs open for a little bit longer in terms of when they first respond. That way, that gives as many people as possible the chance to kind of evaluate and decide whether they're able to do the job that you're asking, and then also to write the proposal and get it into you. So yeah, the longer you have, the better, but there's no real best practice. It's really whatever seems to work best for you, I guess.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think our initial RFP was out for about a month. We also you have to kind of look at it within what your work schedule looks like, but we had it out for about a month. The second, our RFP take 2, we shortened up that timeline to be 1 week. So, it's already been out there, and, we're hoping that we get some better proposals back, or more suited, I shouldn't say better, more suited proposals back from those who had already submitted one. So we really tightened up that timeline. Plus, we're heading into the summer and people disappear. So we are hoping to have, we shortened it up for the second one.
So as you said, we're in the middle of that week, so it does close on Friday. Any other questions from anyone on today? I think it was really good to hear the guiding principles and putting those into practice of openness, fairness, transparency, and value for money. And a lot of it's going to shape on what the priority is for you. Is it a timeline? Is it a budget? And what exactly you're looking for. So I want to thank Liz and David for the time today. I think this is a topic that it's a resource that we can potentially get into some untapped market that we don't necessarily leverage as a sports sector. There's a lot of awesome people out there that can help us as a sector. So thank you for your time today. As mentioned, we will be posting the slides, the resource, the sample, and the PowerPoint, the recording of this session. We do have another PSO sharing next week, and that's focused on technical leaders and coaches, looking at returning to sport, bridging that training gap. It's almost like take 2 from the session we did last year. Now it's been 18 months since a lot of coaches and technical leaders have been with their athletes on a regular basis. It's some of those considerations that we have to watch out for. So if you're interested, the link is there. It's also been sent out to all the PSOs and available on our website. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at my email, which was in your link for today's meeting. If you've got ideas for future sessions and topics you want to dig into that are going to help you as a PSO in an organization, please reach out and we'll try and look for members of our sector that are there to be able to assist us. So again, thank you, Liz. Thank you, David. Really appreciate your time. Thanks to everybody for attending, and we'll see you very soon. Have a great day, everyone.